On September 5, 1982, Mark Colthust and his family were filled with joy and contentment as they celebrated Mark's 28th birthday. It would eventually be one of the last feelings they would ever have. After buying a new fishing boat called the Investor, Colthust was a hardworking man. His wife, Erin, was 3 months pregnant and they had 2 other children, Kimberly, 5, and John, 4. Earlier, Colthust had set sail for the Alaskan fishing town of Craig with his family and 4 crew members, Chris Hyman, Dean Moon, Jerome Keown, and Michael Stewart. These were all young sailors getting ready to start their lives. That day, Colthust and his men were looking forward to getting paid for their last salmon catch, but since the Department of Fish and Wildlife was temporarily closed, they had no choice but to wait. So while they settled in, the crew tied the Investor to a pair of ships already tied up in port, the Rebel and the Knot. This meant that any time someone wanted to get on or off the Investor, they had to pass 2 other ships and 2 other crews. The 4 young men in Colthust were not bothered by the short stop in Craig, and the 4 men headed off in different directions. It is said that the 4 went to buy drugs, but this has never been confirmed. Colthust and his family went to a restaurant and left at around 9:30 p.m. before returning to their boat. That night, the boat the Investor was tied to, the Knot, hosted a party while Colthust, his family and crew slept. This would be the last time anyone on the Investor was seen alive. Unbeknownst to everyone, a man walked to the docks and entered the Rebel and the Knot to reach the Investor. No one on the Knot noticed anyone heading towards the Investor. 3 crew members on the Knot, who were suffering from the effects of drunkenness, failed to see the Investor drifting slowly away from the dock at about 6 a.m. the next day, September 6th. They saw a man on board and waved to him. The man waved back to them, so they assumed it was Colthust and went back to their business. These 3 men had no idea that the Investor was carrying people instead of fish that day. Some time later, another ship saw the Investor come to rest on an island a mile off Craig. Once the Investor had docked on the island, a small boat was used to ferry an unknown man to Craig. The man got off the boat and was seen by several people before disappearing to go to a shop. By this point, no one had heard from the Investor's crew. However, no one suspected anything. The new fishing season had begun, so they were probably getting ready early. In addition, a young man seemed to be going back and forth bringing things to the Investor. But this man was not bringing supplies that the Colthusts had forgotten. He had bought 2.5 gallons of gasoline. The next day, the man returned. After buying gasoline, he went back through the small boat, climbed aboard the Investor, and covered it with gasoline. He set the boat on fire and slowly returned to the small boat. Another boat, the Casino, noticed the smoke and quickly headed to the fire site. They hoped to arrive in time, but instead encountered the young man. Reassuring the Casino crew that everyone on board was okay, he calmly returned to Craig and talked to anyone who would listen. This included the mayor of Craig at the time. In an interview with People magazine, Aksemker told me, "I saw the guy in the small boat. He was a great character. He came over, talked to some people, made a phone call and left. This guy was never seen again. He ran away so fast that everyone was too busy with the fire to pay much attention to him. The only thing they remembered was his scarred face." Meanwhile, government authorities arrived and prevented other boats like the Casino from helping. As a result, the fire burned for 42 hours, turning the Investor into a floating incinerator. By the time the fire was under control, most of the forensic evidence had been lost. These delays caused anything that might have been useful to be burned. Postmortems were later performed on 2 of the bodies recovered. Colthust and his wife Irene were found to have been shot and killed before the fire started. The other 6 were burned beyond recognition and are believed to have been killed shortly after Mark and Irene. In a matter of moments, 8 lives were taken by a man who managed to sneak onto the boat via 2 boats. Armed with a pistol and a shotgun, the killer took advantage of the darkness of night to carry out his heinous crimes. The police felt that Colthust was the sole target, and that the others were simply victims of the killer disposing of evidence. With dozens of eyewitnesses, the man should have been arrested soon after the bodies were discovered. However, many people searched in vain for this unknown man. It is assumed that he left using another boat to get out of Craig. 2 years later, John Kenneth Bell, a 24-year-old boatyard worker, was arrested on suspicion of murder. Police say there is eyewitness and physical evidence against him. He was soon sent to court in Bellingham, where Bell appeared wearing a ski mask to protect his identity. Even then, Craig residents were not satisfied. They felt that the police were too slow in arresting Bell. Things were so difficult for Bell during this trial that a bank in Bellingham refused to open an account for his defense fund. However, people close to Bell defended him as a man of good character. In fact, this seemed to be true. Bell had no criminal history, nor did he have impulse control issues. He had even married a year before the crimes and had a son. In addition, there were many opportunities for any witness to say that he saw John that day, but none of them did. Police claim that Bell is a possible suspect because Colthurst fired Bell for drug use, leaving the two men on bad terms. However, Bell had been dating Colthurst's sister for about 3 years, and Mark and Irene bought Bell a wedding present after he was fired. It would make sense for the two to remain on good terms. They had similar social circles and were in the same industry. In fact, Bell was allegedly seen talking to Colthurst in the restaurant prior to the crimes, with no mention of a falling out. However, Bell's previous firing created a motive for the police that seems to make Bell guilty. Investigators claim that Bell was angry about being fired and held on to that resentment for a year. After meeting Colthurst at the restaurant, Bell took advantage of the situation. He waited for the storm to get worse, then boarded the mutineer and the knot, confronted Colthurst and his wife who were drunk, and fought with them and killed them in a fit of rage. He then went around the ship and killed anyone who was alive. Once everything was done, Bill waited until morning, drifted the boat away in silence, and waited a day before he went to the store to buy gasoline and burn the boat. From here, investigators began to look not at who was guilty, but at the question of, can we pursue charges? Bell's attorneys could argue that since no witnesses could locate Bell, and his character testimony was strong, he couldn't have done it. Furthermore, Bell's attorneys proved that gasoline had not been used, but rather kerosene or some other flammable substance due to the residue left behind by the fire. As a result, Judge Thomas Schultz dismissed the charges against Bell. He could still stand trial on this, but the prosecution needed more evidence. In October of that same year, Bell was charged a second time. This time, prosecutors had a better strategy. However, it was still weak. They relied on eyewitness testimony that was shaky at best. John Fendi, a captain who was in the area at the time, claimed that he had been drinking and heard gunshots in the distance. A waitress at the restaurant, the last person to see the Colthursts, also claimed to have seen Bell talking to Colthurst that day. Both accounts were scrutinized by Bell's defense team. Furthermore, there were more witnesses who suddenly claimed to remember information about Bell that had not been discussed in the previous trial. Eventually, it was discovered that the prosecutors had agreed to drop the charges if these individuals spoke in court. With all of this, the new jury could not reach a consensus, resulting in a dissenting jury where no solid motive was ever presented. As a result, John Bell was a free man and acquitted. However, the story was not over for Bell and his family. The trial took nearly 5 years of his life and he was mostly under house arrest. Hundreds of thousands of dollars were spent trying to defend himself. Bell later decided to sue the state for $150 million. In this suit, he also requested that the investigation continue. However, because the state still believes he was the perpetrator, the case remains closed to this day. After several years of litigation, Bell reached a settlement of $900,000. It was not close to what Bell had asked for, but it was better than nothing. Alaska still believes Bell committed the crime and has closed its investigation, but that opens up more questions. If so many people in Craig saw the man who left the boat, why is there no confirmation that it was Bell, and why did Bell ask for the investigation to continue? There was someone responsible for this, Bell said in an interview. There is someone out there who knows what happened, but I'm not going to waste any more of my life on it. This case will likely remain open forever, as Alaska is not prepared to reopen the investigation at this time. Even if the case is reopened, the uncontrollable fire means that any evidence that could be used is lost forever. Dozens of eyewitnesses, 8 bodies, and a perpetrator is still at large. The only thing that is certain is that Craig, Alaska, will never be the same, and that the Colthurst family and the 4 young men on that boat lost their lives in what can only be assumed to be senseless violence. So we've reached the end. I hope you liked the story. Don't forget to like and subscribe.